YouTube, what's up? Back again for another daily fishing video here on Andrew Upshaw Fishing. I know y'all were expecting part 3 of the most Amazonas trip, and unfortunately that is not this video. I need a little bit more time editing that video, and I want to make it really special for you guys, so I just need a little bit more time. But you know, today's video, I really want to talk about something that happened yesterday. Yesterday I was in the boat with a really good friend of mine, Todd Castledine. Y'all might know him. You kind of see him every once in a while. No, I'm just kidding. But no, Todd and I got to go fishing yesterday for the first time since I moved back. And granted, I've been here for about 5 to 6 months now, and that's just how busy I've been. So Todd and I jumped in the boat yesterday to do a little filming, and unfortunately, the weather did not cooperate. I mean, it was super duper windy. I mean, one of those like 25 to 30 mile an hour wind days, and we still caught them. And we caught them doing something that kind of brought me back, and I want to talk to y'all about it a little bit. And that's throwing a swim jig. And, you know, and we throw our swim jigs here a little bit different than some places. And different than I do mostly around the country. I mean, it's just the way we fish it here is just a little bit different. And I want to explain to you how we fish it and why we do it the way that we do it. But hey, real fast though, if you have not subscribed to my YouTube channel, I would really appreciate it if you did so. It really helps me out to know who's actually watching and who wants to come back and watch it again. Comment below if you've tried this trick. I bet you have, and maybe you haven't. And if you haven't, hopefully it will help you put more fish in the boat. So the way we fish our swim jigs here in Texas, and this is something that Todd taught me a long time ago. I'll be the first to tell you, he is the person who taught me this technique. Is we kind of reel ours down in the water a little bit. We don't just fish it like everybody else, you know. In certain situations we do if it calls for it, but the thing we do is we fish on 20-pound fluorocarbon. I'm using the Strike King Tour Grade fluorocarbon, just the line I use, but 20 pound is a really important number. You need that really heavy fluorocarbon. Now, you know, I'm going to have a lot of guys say, well, I only throw braid on the swim jig, and that, you know, there's a lot of times that's all I throw too. But in the situation of how we fish this particular jig, you need to have fluorocarbon. So when we're fishing in Texas, we're fishing around submerged vegetation, whether it's hydrilla, milfoil, pad stems, you name it. We fish around a lot of different covers. So having the ability to keep the jig high and low in the water column is an extremely important thing. So if you're throwing braid all the time, let's just say you're throwing 30-pound braid, which is the normal size braid for most people who are throwing a swim jig, unless you're in Florida, and then you might upsize to 50 or 65. But anyways, if you're throwing 30-pound braid and you're popping that jig, you know, the way they do it in Alabama, they just pop, 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 pop. They're keeping it up high in water willow, around cover, around wood, and all that stuff. And that's a great way to fish it, but the problem is with braid is it floats, so it doesn't sink. Now, I think there's a couple braids out there that do sink, but for the sake of this video, I'm just going to say that the braids float. Well, what that does is whenever you're fishing that swim jig, it's actually going to help keep that swim jig high in the water column. Fluorocarbon doesn't do that. Fluorocarbon, you actually have to fish a little bit faster to keep it up high, but you can reel it low and keep it down in the water column. And that's how we like to fish it. So when you get around those hydrilla places where the grass is 3 to 6 foot down, you can actually slow roll like a spinnerbait. And some people are going to say, well, how do you know when you get a bite? And 9 times out of 10, when they hit it, I mean, they hit it really, really hard. And so there's not a lot of confusion. It reminds me a lot of fishing a biffle bug, actually. You know, when you're crawling it on the bottom, you have to really pay attention because sometimes they hit it and they come to you. Sometimes they hit it and go to the side. I mean, you got to really pay attention because sometimes you don't feel the bite and you just have to set the hook on maybe like a maybe bite. So like you're reeling it and you're like, man, that feels really weird, I'm gonna set the hook. And sometimes that's a fish just kind of going up there and just nipping at it and you're just not feeling it. But gear is extremely important for this technique. And this is where the 20-pound line comes in. It's not necessarily because you're hooking all these giant fish or, you know, the 20 sinks faster than the 10. You know, it's none of that stuff, for us at least. It has nothing to do with that. The 20 is important because we got to throw a little bit heavier action rods. And you ask why? Why do you need to throw a heavier action rod? Well, for the way that we fish it, and around the cover that we fish, so whether it's wood, hydrilla, pad stems, whatever it may be, that heavy action rod is going to allow you to set the hook really hard, and sometimes you have to get that hook driven in, and also to get that fish away from the cover. So in the case of where Todd and I were fishing, we were fishing around a lot of pad stems yesterday, submerged hydrilla that was about 1 to 2 foot down. And so we would kind of vary our retrieve. If the grass was about a foot under the water, we'd keep it high. You had to reel a little faster, you had to pop it a little bit. But as we get in those holes, we'd let that swim jig kind of fall down in there, and we just kind of pop it up and down. And that was really important. So that 20-pound line can actually stand, it can handle that hook set that you need to have with that with that heavy action rod. The one I use is a Lew's Ledge Jig Worm rod. This is just my all-around rod. If you watch my channel, you know this is a rod that I rely on all the time. And a fast gear ratio reel is extremely important. At the bare minimum, you need a 7:5 gear ratio. In some situations, you might even need an 8:1. The deal is the faster you can set the hook with this thing, the more successful you're going to be. Because sometimes they're already swimming with it, you don't even realize it. So having that is extremely important. When it comes to jig size, there's a bunch of jig sizes out there. I'll be the first to tell you, there's no laid out plan like this is the exact one you need. Day in and day out, I go to a 3/8 to a 1/2 ounce. I vary my swim jigs. I have a lot of different ones I throw. Yesterday, we were actually throwing the Hack Attack heavy cover swim jig, which has a big hook, like a big gauge hook. And I was sitting there talking to Todd. I was like, man, that's a pretty big hook for fluorocarbon. He's like, man, you'll be shocked how good you hook them. Because most of the time when I'm fishing in the swim jig, I'm fishing it on braid. The hook kind of scared me a little bit because I didn't want to it's just a big gauge, guys. I'm going to be honest. I didn't think it would work. And this is exactly how I fished it. I mean, you see how thick that weed guard is. I didn't trim a single bit out of it. I literally got in his boat and he handed me a couple swim jigs and said, hey, tie this on real quick. We're going to go throw a swim jig. And I tied it on. Because, I have Strike King jigs. Believe me, I got plenty. I just didn't want to carry all my tackle. I literally took a handful of rods and that was it, and camera gear. And but the deal is with this, I was throwing a 3/8. He was throwing a 1/2 ounce. Sometimes we throw a 1/4. It just kind of depends on what we're actually fishing it around. But one thing is absolutely for sure. And this, you can take this to the bank. When we're fishing it on fluorocarbon, we always throw a swimming caffeine shad. The big size too, like 5-inch. And we cut it down a little bit. This is just the way that we fished it forever. Honestly, it hasn't ever changed. This is the way we've done it. And it's worked extremely, extremely well. The one thing though that we do that I feel like is different than others is we keep it in our hands. A lot of times as an angler, and I fall victim to this as well, is we will pick up this jig or another bait. We'll just say a deep dive crankbait. We fish it for 5 minutes and we don't get a bite and we don't catch anything. We put it down, we pick something else up. With this jig, you got to pick it up and you got to throw it and you got to throw it and you throw it some more and even more. And before long, you're going to say, okay, this little section here has got some fish and that little section there has some fish and all this other, they didn't eat my swim jig. But you can go in and day out to those little sections and you're going to catch more and more fish. So, guys, I'm not telling you the way you're fishing it before is wrong. But I'm saying in this situation, the way we fish it here in Texas, in a completely different situation, fishing it lower in the water, fishing that fluorocarbon will absolutely get you a lot of bites and have a lot of fun out there. Guys, I hope y'all enjoyed this video. I hope y'all learned a little bit about slow reeling a swim jig, fishing it the way we do, what I would like to call Texas style here in Texas. And maybe you can take it to your lake and have some, and maybe a whole lot of success. Guys, I hope y'all enjoyed this video, and I'll see you on the next one.